Captain Zixithara pressed her four-fingered hands against the smooth control surface of her research vessel, watching the red warning lights pulse like a dying heart. Her silver skin had taken on an unhealthy gray tint, and her large, dark eyes reflected the terror that gripped her crew of 12. "Captain," whispered Navigation Officer Vrel, his voice barely audible through the ship's failing communication system. "The Devourers, they've broken through our final defense grid. Estimated. Time to breach, 14 minutes. Zixithara's throat sacs inflated with a sharp intake of breath. The Devourers. Ancient mechanical horrors that consumed entire worlds, leaving nothing but empty space and scattered atoms. Her people, the Kithani, had spent 3 centuries running from them across the galaxy. Now, trapped in this remote system while conducting archaeological research, they had nowhere left to run. "Send the distress call on all frequencies," she ordered, her voice steadier than she felt. "Emergency Protocol 77 Alpha. Include our biological scans and planetary classification data." Vrel's tentacles danced across his console. "Captain, the nearest Galactic Council patrol ships are 4 days away. Even if they received our signal, I know." Zixithara watched through the viewport as massive, spider-like constructs the size of moons emerged from hyperspace. Their surfaces writhed, with mechanical tendrils that could strip a planet bare in hours. "But we have to try." The first Devourer turned toward their small research ship, its sensor arrays focusing on them like the eyes of a predator spotting wounded prey. Zixithara had seen recordings of what happened next. The screaming, the dissolution of matter at the molecular level, the way entire civilizations simply ended. "Signal transmitted, Captain," Vrel reported, "broadcasting on quantum frequencies across 3,000 light-years of space." "Will anyone even hear it?" asked Chief Scientist Mora from her station, her normally pristine white fur now damp with fear sweat. "Most species classify our region as dead space." Zixithara was about to respond when their communications array crackled with static. Then, impossibly, a voice emerged from the cosmic background noise. The voice was rough, guttural, speaking in the common trade language with an accent none of them had ever heard. "Unknown vessel, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force ship Defiant. We've received your distress call. Hang tight, we're coming in hot." The Kithani bridge crew exchanged bewildered looks. Terran? None of them had heard of any species called Terrans. But before Zixithara could respond, 3 ships dropped out of hyperspace between her vessel and the approaching Devourers. These weren't the sleek, elegant craft favored by most spacefaring civilizations. These ships looked like they'd been built in a forge and hammered into shape by giants, angular, brutal, covered in what appeared to be weapons. So many weapons. "This is impossible," Mora whispered. "Who builds ships like that?" The lead ship, barely half the size of the smallest Devourer, opened a communication channel. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a creature that made the Kithani crew gasp in shock. The being had pale skin stretched over what appeared to be dense bone structure. Its eyes were small, predatory, and a startling blue color. Most disturbing of all, it showed its teeth when it spoke. Rows of white, pointed objects that marked it clearly as a carnivore. "I'm Captain Chen," the creature said, and despite its frightening appearance, its voice carried an odd warmth. "You folks okay over there? We're reading some pretty nasty energy signatures headed your way." Zixithara found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a squeak. "Captain Chen, the Devourers. You have to leave. They'll destroy everything. The human, for that's what Captain Chen was, though the Kithani didn't know it yet, tilted her head with what might have been amusement. "Devourers, huh? The big mechanical squid things?" She looked off screen, apparently addressing someone on her bridge. "Rodriguez, run a scan on those contacts. How many we looking at?" A voice responded from off screen. 12 capital ships, Captain. Each one's about the size of a small moon. Energy readings suggest there's some kind of matter conversion technology." "Right." Captain Chen turned back to the screen, and that disturbing tooth display appeared again. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to move your ship about 50,000 kilometers back and we're going to handle this. Handle this? Zixthara's voice rose in pitch. Captain Chen, with all respect, you have 3 ships. They have 12. Each one could consume your vessels without slowing down. Ma'am, Captain Chen said, and her expression grew serious. You called for help. Help has arrived. Trust me on this one. The transmission ended, leaving the Kithani crew staring at a blank screen. Through their viewport, they watched the 3 human ships accelerate toward the Devourers at speeds that should have turned their crews into paste against the bulkheads. What are they doing? Vrel whispered. They were about to find out. Chapter 2. When predators meet prey, the first human ship opened fire while still 50,000 kilometers away from the nearest devourer. Zixthara had seen many weapon systems in her career as a researcher. Energy beams that could cut through reinforced hull plating, plasma bolts that could melt asteroid-sized rocks, gravitational weapons that could crush matter into neutronium. She had never seen anything like this. The Defiant spat forth a stream of what appeared to be solid projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed, but these weren't simple kinetic rounds. Each projectile contained a fusion warhead that detonated on impact, followed by a matter-antimatter reaction that lit up space like a newborn star. The devourer that took the first hit actually staggered. Impossible. Mora breathed, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The energy output, they're using controlled antimatter reactions as conventional ammunition, but the humans weren't done. The second ship, which they would later learn was called Retribution, launched a spread of missiles that moved with impossible precision. When the Devourer's defensive systems tried to intercept them, the missiles split apart, each becoming dozens of smaller warheads that weaved between the defensive fire like living things. The explosions when they hit weren't just bright. They were beautiful, cascading energy waves that made the Devourer's own hull plating spark and crack. Why aren't they dissolving? Vrel asked, and it was a good question. The Devourer's primary weapon was their matter conversion beam, which should have reduced the human ships to component atoms within seconds of contact. The answer came when Captain Chen's voice crackled over their communication system again. Fair. Warning, folks. Things are about to get a little loud. You might want to shield your sensors. The third human ship, Vindication, had been hanging back, apparently charging some kind of weapon system. Now it fired, and the result was unlike anything in the Kithani archives. A beam of pure, coherent energy lanced out and struck the largest devourer dead center. But this wasn't the steady, continuous beam of most energy weapons. This pulsed, each pulse containing more energy than their entire research vessel could generate in a year. The devourer's hull didn't just crack, it exploded outward in great chunks of twisted metal and sparking circuits. What are they? Zixthara whispered. That's when the devourers began to adapt. It was what made them so terrifying, their ability to analyze and counter any weapon system after the first few hits. The remaining 11 constructs shifted their formation, their hull plating reconfiguring to better absorb the human weapons. Fire. More importantly, they began to fire back. The matter conversion beams lanced out toward the human ships, and Zixthara was certain she was about to witness the destruction of their unlikely rescuers. The beam struck the Defiant head-on and nothing happened. How? Mora started to ask, but Captain Chen's voice cut her off. Their conversion beams work by exciting matter at the quantum level, right? The human said, as casually as if discussing the weather. Pretty standard tech. We've been dealing with similar weapons for about 50 years now. Standard Higgs field manipulation. Our hull plating includes quantum stabilizers, makes the molecular bonds too tight for that kind of disruption. She spoke as if facing weapons that could dissolve planets was a common Tuesday afternoon occurrence. The human ships pressed their attack, moving in patterns that seemed to defy the laws of physics. They accelerated, decelerated, and changed direction at rates that should have liquefied any living crew. But somehow they not only survived these maneuvers, they used them tactically. Retribution. dove beneath a Devourer's firing arc while unleashing a barrage of projectiles at its underbelly. Vindication spiraled around another, its energy, beam carving through the construct's hull like a blade through cloth. And Defiant seemed to be everywhere at once, its weapon systems firing continuously without any sign of overheating or power drain. "Captain," Varel's voice shook. "Their weapons output, it's impossible. The energy requirements alone should have drained their power cores hours ago." "What powers their ships?" Mora asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. "They got..." Their answer when one of the Devourers managed to score a direct hit on Retribution's hull. The explosion tore away a section of the ship's outer plating, revealing the interior structure. Inside, they could see what looked like a miniature star. "They're carrying controlled stellar fusion reactors," Mora gasped. "They've contained the nuclear heart of a sun inside their ships." "What kind of insane species does that?" Varel asked. "Captain," Chen's voice came over the comm again, and she sounded almost cheerful. "Hey, research vessel. You might want to back up a bit more. We're about to try something new." The 3 human ships formed a tight formation, their battered hulls bearing scars from the battle but their weapons still blazing. What happened next would be talked about in Cathani scientific circles for generations. The ships began to spin around each other in a complex orbital dance, their energy weapons firing in perfect synchronization. The beams met at a focal point, directly in front of the largest remaining Devourer, and where they intersected, space itself seemed to tear. Are they creating an artificial black hole?" Mora whispered. The gravitational anomaly lasted only seconds, but it was enough. The massive Devourer construct was pulled apart by tidal forces, its component atoms stretched across kilometers of space, before the anomaly collapsed and winked out of existence. 8 Devourers remained, and now they were angry. But as they moved to surround the human ships, Zixthara noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. The humans weren't retreating or trying to escape. They were laughing. She could hear it over the comm channel, actual laughter, as if this battle against humanity's worst nightmares was somehow enjoyable. "What are they?" she whispered again. She was about to find out that the answer was more terrifying than she could imagine. Chapter 3. The Nature of Hunters. "All right, people," Captain Chen's voice crackled over the communication channel. "Time to show these ancient pieces of scrap what evolution looks like." The remaining 8 Devourers had learned from watching their companions die. They shifted into a defensive formation, their matter conversion beams creating an interlocking field of destruction that should have been impossible to penetrate. Their adaptive programming had analyzed the human weapons and was already developing countermeasures. What they hadn't accounted for was human adaptability. "Rodriguez," Captain Chen called out. "Remember that thing we tried during the Proxima Centauri campaign? The one that nearly got us court-martialed?" came the reply. "That's the one. Think it'll work here?" "Captain, we're dealing with technology that's millions of years old. These things have probably seen every weapon configuration in the galaxy." Chen's disturbing smile was audible in her voice. "Yeah, but they've never seen us." Zixthara watched, in fascination and horror as the human ships began to separate, moving in directions that made no tactical sense. Defiant accelerated directly toward the center of the Devourer formation, apparently on a suicide run. Retribution angled toward the system's asteroid belt, and Vindication simply stopped. "What are they doing?" Varel asked, his tentacles quivering with anxiety. The Devourers fired as one, their combined beams converging on the approaching Defiant. The energy discharge was enough to sterilize a planet's surface. But at the last possible second, the human ship did something that violated several fundamental laws of physics. It teleported. Not the smooth, controlled transition of most species, jump technology, but an instantaneous displacement that left a brief tear in space-time itself. Defiant reappeared inside the Devourer formation, its weapons blazing at point-blank range, but that was just the distraction. While the Devourers focused on Defiant, Retribution had reached the asteroid belt and was doing something that made Mora's scientific mind reel. The ship was using its tractor beams to accelerate asteroids to significant fractions of light speed, then teleporting them directly into the Devourer's hull plating. Not energy weapons, not exotic matter. Simple rocks, moving at relativistic speeds. The impacts were devastating. Each asteroid strike released as much energy as a fusion bomb, but more importantly, the Devourer's adaptive systems had no framework for defending against what was essentially weaponized geology. "Brilliant," Mora whispered. "They're using the most primitive weapons imaginable at impossible velocities. The Devourer's adaptive programming can't counter something so fundamentally simple." But Vindication had the most terrifying strategy of all. The ship had stopped moving entirely and was drawing power from some massive internal source. Energy readings spiked beyond anything in the Kithani database as the ship's main weapon charged. "Energy signature indicates they're channeling the entire output of their fusion reactor into a single beam," Vrel reported, his voice shaking. That's enough energy to crack a moon." "What's their target?" Zixthara asked. The answer came in a flash of light that temporarily blinded their sensors. When vision cleared, one of the largest Devourers had been carved completely in half, its internal systems exposed and sparking. But the beam hadn't stopped there. It had continued, on to cut through a second Devourer, then a third before finally dissipating into space. 3 kills with 1 shot. "How are they still alive?" Zixthara asked. "Channeling that much energy should have vaporized their ship." The answer came when she got a better look at Vindication. The ship's hull was glowing white-hot, and entire sections were peeling away, like melting metal. But underneath the damaged outer plating, she could see a secondary hull that seemed to be absorbing and redistributing the excess energy. "They built their ships to survive their own weapons," Mora said in amazement. "They're not just willing to take damage to achieve victory. They've engineered their technology around the assumption that they will take damage." 4 Devourers remained, and they were adapting faster now, their ancient programming finally beginning to understand the threat they faced. They clustered together, overlapping their defensive fields and preparing to unleash their own version of a combined attack. That's when Captain Chen made a decision that would haunt Zixthara's dreams for cycles to come. "All ships, this is Defiant. Execute Protocol Omega." The 3 human ships moved into a triangular formation around the remaining Devourers, their weapon systems powering down. For a moment it looked like they were surrendering. Then they began to self-destruct. Not the violent explosion most species used as a last resort, but a controlled matter-antimatter reaction that turned each ship into a miniature supernova. The energy release was precisely calculated, creating a sphere of destruction that encompassed all 4 remaining Devourers. When the light faded, nothing remained but cooling plasma and scattered atoms. "No," Zixthara whispered. "They sacrificed themselves to save us." But then her communication system crackled to life and Captain Chen's voice emerged from the static. "Research vessel, this is Defiant. Sorry about the light show, we're about 10,000 kilometers off your starboard side. Everyone okay over there?" Zixthara's head snapped toward the viewport. There, intact and apparently undamaged, were the 3 human ships. "How?" Vrel breathed. "Teleportation. At the moment of detonation," Mora said, her scientific mind working frantically to understand. "They teleported away microseconds before their ships exploded, then teleported back to collect the debris and reform their vessels, using the energy from the matter-antimatter reactions. It was impossible. It was insane. It was the most terrifyingly brilliant tactical maneuver any of them had ever witnessed." "Captain Chen," Zixthara said, her voice barely steady. What are you?" There was a pause before the human answered, and when she did, her voice carried a strange mix of pride and something that might have been sadness. "We're human, ma'am. We come from a little blue planet called Earth, out in the Orion Arm, and we heard you needed help. But your weapons, your ships, your tactics, how did you become so good at destruction?" Captain Chen finished. Well, that's a long story. Mind if we come aboard? I think we have some things to discuss. As the human shuttle approached, their research vessel, Zixthara wondered what kind of world could produce creatures capable of such incredible violence and such compassionate response to a stranger's call for help. She was about to learn that the answer was more complex than she could imagine. Chapter 4. Children of the Death World. The human who stepped through the airlock was smaller than Zixthara had expected. Captain Sarah Chen stood barely 1.5 meters tall, with dark hair pulled back in a practical style, and those unnerving blue eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. She moved with a fluid grace that suggested coiled strength, and when she smiled, showing those predatory teeth, it somehow managed to be both terrifying and reassuring. "Permission to come aboard, Captain?" she asked, her voice carrying the formal courtesy of one military officer addressing another. "Granted," Zixthara managed, though her throat sacs were tight with nervous energy. We owe you our lives, Captain Chen." "Just doing our job," Chen replied, but her expression grew more serious as she looked around the Kithani Bridge. "Though, I have to ask, what's a research vessel doing this far out in the dark? This region isn't exactly on the standard trade routes." Zixthara gestured to her crew, noting how they all instinctively took a step back from the human. "We're archaeologists, Captain. We were investigating reports of a pre-sapient civilization in this system when the Devourers arrived." "Pre-sapient?" Chen's eyebrows rose with what appeared to be genuine interest. "Like early tool users? Stone Age stuff?" "More advanced than that," Chief Scientist Mora spoke up, though she kept her distance. "Evidence suggests they achieved basic spaceflight before something happened to them." Chen nodded thoughtfully. "Devourers get them?" "We believe so. The orbital debris patterns suggest their homeworld was completely consumed approximately 50,000 years ago." 50,000. Chen's expression grew distant. "That's about when the Devourers first showed up in this region, according to our databases." Zixthara blinked in surprise. "Your databases? Captain Chen, forgive me, but we've never heard of your species. How do you know about the Devourers?" "Because they've been trying to eat our galaxy for the past 1,000,000 years, Chen said simply. "We've been fighting them for, about 3 centuries now." Navigation Officer Vrel's tentacles curled in distress. 3 centuries? But how do you survive? The Devourers adapt to any weapon system, any defense. Every species that's encountered them has either fled or been consumed. Chen's smile returned, and this time it carried a distinctly predatory edge. "That's because most species try to fight them the way they fight each other. Clean, efficient, minimal casualties. The Devourers are machines. They operate on algorithms and predictive models. They expect rational behavior. And you don't behave rationally?" Zixthara asked. "Humans," Chen said, settling into a chair that looked far too delicate to support her dense frame, "are not rational creatures. We evolved on what the galactic community would classify as a Class 12 death world." The Kithani crew exchanged glances. Death worlds were legendary, planets so hostile that they were considered uninhabitable by any sane species. "What's Earth's threat classification?" Mora asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. "Oh, we don't use the standard scale anymore," Chen said casually. "Earth broke it. We had to create a new classification system just for our homeworld. It's currently rated as Apocalyptic Plus, with a recommendation that all non-human species maintain a minimum safe distance of 50 light years. 50 light years? Vrel's voice cracked. "Well, that's just for the planet itself. Humans are cleared for general contact, obviously, or I wouldn't be sitting here." Zixthara found her voice. "What makes your world so dangerous?" Chen looked thoughtful for a moment, as if trying to decide where to begin. "Let's see. 90% of the native species are venomous, poisonous, or both. The weather systems regularly produce storm fronts that could flatten most cities. The oceans are filled with predators that make the Devourers look friendly. Volcanic activity, seismic instability, Radiation from a highly active star, gravity about twice what most species consider comfortable. She paused, noting the horrified expressions on the Kithani faces. Oh, and then there are the other humans. Other humans? Zixathera asked weakly. Yeah, we spent most of our evolutionary history trying to kill each other. Competition for resources, territorial disputes, ideological differences. We got very, very good at finding new and creative ways to end lives. By the time we achieved spaceflight, we had weapons that could sterilize continents and tactical doctrines that assumed massive casualties were just part of the process. Mora's fur had gone completely white. How did your species survive? That's the thing about Deathworlds, Chen said, her voice taking on an oddly gentle tone. They don't just create survivors, they create adaptive survivors. Every challenge we faced made us stronger, smarter, more flexible. We learned to cooperate when we needed to, compete when we had to, and fight when there was no other choice. But the Devourers, Varel started. The Devourers are machines, Chen interrupted. They follow patterns, algorithms, predictive models. But humans were chaos. We make decisions based on emotion, intuition, sheer bloody-mindedness. We'll sacrifice everything to save a stranger, then turn around and fight each other over philosophical differences. We're completely, utterly unpredictable. She stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the debris field that had once been 12 world-killing machines. When we first encountered the Devourers, they did exactly what they've always done. Analyzed our weapons, adapted their defenses, and prepared to consume our worlds. What they didn't expect was that we'd adapt faster. How? Zixthara asked. We stopped fighting them like a military force and started fighting them like an ecosystem, Chen said. See, on Earth, the most successful predators aren't the ones with the biggest teeth or the strongest muscles. They're the ones that can change their hunting strategies on the fly. Pack hunters that can become ambush predators, solitary killers, that can coordinate with others when needed. She turned back to face the Kithani crew. We don't fight the Devourers with superior technology. We fight them with superior adaptability. Every engagement teaches us something new. Every loss shows us a weakness to exploit. And every victory makes us more unpredictable. Is that why you responded to our distress call? Zixthara asked. To learn from another encounter? Chen's expression softened. No, Captain. We responded because someone needed help. And that's what humans do. It's not rational, it's not strategically sound, and it usually gets us into more trouble than we can handle. She paused, that predatory smile returning. But it's also why we're still alive when every other species runs from the Devourers. We don't just fight to survive, we fight to protect. And that makes us very, very dangerous. As if to emphasize her point, the communication system crackled with an incoming message from the human fleet. Captain Chen, we're picking up Devourer reinforcements on long-range sensors. Estimated arrival in 6 hours. Chen sighed. How many? Looks like, about 40 ships, Captain, maybe 50. The Kithani crew paled, but Chen just nodded calmly. Roger that. Signal the fleet. We're implementing a fighting retreat. And send a message to Earth Command. We need the 7th Fleet out here within 48 hours. She turned to address the horrified Kithani. Don't worry. 50 Devourers is a Tuesday afternoon for us. But just to be safe, how would you folks feel about accepting a ride back to civilized space? I think you've had enough excitement for one research expedition. As Zixthara watched the human captain coordinate what appeared to be preparations for another impossible battle, she finally understood what they had encountered. Humans weren't just another spacefaring species. They were evolution's answer to an hostile universe. Creatures so adaptable, so unpredictable, so willing to sacrifice themselves for others, that they had turned warfare into an art form and compassion into a weapon. They were exactly what the galaxy needed, and they were absolutely terrifying. Epilogue: The Ripple Effect 6 months later. The Galactic Council chambers had never hosted a presentation quite like this one. Zixathara stood at the central podium, her silver skin now bearing the confident gleam of someone who had survived the impossible. Around her, representatives from hundreds of species listened with rapt attention as she described the battle that had changed everything. The human tactical doctrine, she explained, gesturing to the holographic display showing the engagement, is based on a principle they call controlled chaos. They don't just adapt to their enemies, they force their enemies to adapt to them. In Iowa, the audience, Ambassador Krell of the Zerani Collective, raised a scaled appendage. Captain Zixathara, these humans, are they seeking to join the Galactic Council? Zixthara's throat sacs inflated with what might have been amusement. I asked Captain Chen that very question, Ambassador. Her response was, and I quote, "We're too busy fighting devourers to sit in committee meetings." A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the assembly. The devourers had been the galaxy's nightmare for millennia, an unstoppable force that drove entire civilizations to the Rim territories. The idea that someone was not just fighting them, but winning, seemed almost too good to be true. However, Zixathara continued, the humans have made it clear that they're willing to respond to distress calls from any species, anywhere in the galaxy. They ask for nothing in return except the opportunity to study devourer technology and tactics. What have they learned? Asked the representative from the Stellar Confederation. That the devourers aren't just consuming matter, Zixthara replied, her voice growing grave. They're harvesting it, building something vast in the galactic core. The humans believe we're looking at the construction phase of something they call a Dyson swarm, a structure that would encompass entire star systems. The chamber erupted in concerned chatter. A civilization capable of building on that scale would have godlike power. But the humans have a plan, Zixthara continued, raising her voice above the noise. They're not just fighting individual devourer fleets. They're preparing for a coordinated assault on whatever the machines are building. She paused, looking around the assembly. They've asked me to extend an invitation to any species willing to join them. Not as subordinates or allies in the traditional sense, but as what they call pack hunters. They want to teach us their adaptive tactics, share their technology, and create a combined force capable of ending the devourer threat once and for all. The chamber fell silent. Many of the species present had fled from the devourers for generations. The idea of turning to face them seemed insane. What are the risks? Asked the Andromedan representative. Zixathara's expression grew thoughtful. The humans were very honest about that. They told me that anyone who joins their campaign should expect heavy casualties, impossible odds, and tactics that will challenge every assumption about civilized warfare. And the benefits? Freedom, Zixathara said simply. The end of running. The chance to reclaim the territories we've lost and... She paused, remembering Captain Chen's words. The knowledge that we stood up to the darkness when it mattered most. As the debate began, Zixathara thought about her last conversation with Captain Chen. The human had been preparing for yet another engagement with a devourer fleet, but she'd taken time to walk Zixathara to the shuttle bay. Are you sure about this? Zixathara had asked. Taking on the entire galaxy's nightmare practically single-handed? Chen had shrugged, that predatory smile playing around her lips. Someone has to. Besides, humans have never been good at backing down from a fight, especially when innocent. People are in danger. What if you fail? Then we fail trying, Chen had replied. But between you and me, Captain, we don't plan on failing. We've got something the devourers will never understand. What's that? Each other. Now listening to the Council debate humanity's offer, Zixathara wondered if they would find the courage to accept. The humans were right about one thing. They couldn't face the devourer's ultimate plan alone. But then again, she thought, watching the assembled representatives argue about risk assessments and casualty projections, maybe that was the point. Maybe the humans weren't offering to let other species join their fight. Maybe they were offering to teach them how to become fighters. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, as Zixathara remembered the sight of 3 impossible ships turning the tide against impossible odds, she found it oddly comforting. The galaxy's nightmares had finally met something scarier than they were, and its name was humanity. End.